What's up? Welcome back to my channel, or for the first time if you're new. I'm Sylvan, and today I'm going to be reacting to the Myriad Celestia trailer for Feixiao, called The Arrow That Seeks the Stars. So, I was hoping to get to this yesterday, but I wasn't able to because I just had way too much to say about Jane's demo. Feel free to check that out to see what I'm talking about, but with that, I'm just going to get straight into this. Feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video, and leave a comment on your thoughts. Let's get into this.
首相は将軍の魂を弔うためにある。
Wait a minute. Yeah, okay, this is on the English channel. Interesting.
またあの光。
Huh. Oh, actually, I think I heard something about weird voice actor stuff happening.
流れ星を追い越せるか。
Ooh.
かつて私たちは食料として死ぬか鮮度として生きるかしかなかった。でもあの光を見つけた。それは言った。ただ遠くを見ろ。ただ速さを求めろ。ただ前へ進め。そうすれば
Oh, okay. A mentor figure, Feixiao?
地を這いつくばる獲物じゃない。奴らの指揮を決める力がある。
勇猛なる運気部、請求の勝利。老公を打ち、儒家の災いを鎮め。単身敵陣を破り、功績を上げる。天撃将軍がいる以上。 妖精を揺るがすことはできない。
Cool. Interesting.
天地はまだ自由じゃない。低級の矢には消えない力がある。
I'm loving the transitions between modern and past.
その矢よ。
This is fucking cool.
まだ残党はいる。決戦は終わってない。私が先陣を切れば、その先には大将がある。
Oh? Oh? What? I was not aware that this was a thing.
足りない。まだ足りない。 この恐怖と向き合うという遵守は死ぬまで止まらない。
Huh. Okay. Oh, there's still more.
天球の神よ、いつの日か 恐怖が私を飲み込むわ。
Oh.
でもこの矢尻はあなたより先にこの心臓を貫く。
Okay. Interesting. Okay, I want to click through this. So, Feixiao funeral to grant rest to General Yueyu's spirit. I'm terrible with pronunciation, so I probably got that wrong, but oh well. So, from the looks of it here, it looks like the bow of the mentor figure. I'm taking that to be General Yueyu. So I take it that this is the funeral of her mentor that is being referenced here, the death of her mentor. And we start here with her holding the bow. Presumably the mentor's helmet sat there, which actually makes me realize I guess her mentor is connected to the one artifact set. I'm forgetting what Star Rail calls it. So she's holding the bow, presumably at the funeral, as this is her modern appearance. She looks up to the skies and sees a shooting star that has like a rainbow coloration to it, presumably signifying the hunt. And what leads me to think that as well is the line, "Look, it's that meteoric radiance again." Meteoric in parentheses. If this was in English, I could more concretely say if that is because meteoric wasn't being said, or if it's just a certain emphasis being placed. But based on how they've done a few of these things, I wouldn't be surprised if that is sort of a hidden meaning thing going on here, where meteoric isn't actually said, but it is just put in the subtitles secretly, because they've done that that before. And then she says, let's compare then. She pulls back the bow. Can this arrow outpace a shooting star? And then we get a shot of her aiming the arrow at us. Okay, I don't know exactly what this is calling reference to, but I'm gonna see if I can pick up on it moving forward to see if I can loop back around to it. Then we get this very interesting scene, which, if I'm understanding correctly, is young Feixiao fleeing the Borisins who are chasing after her. Once, we couleur die as little more than food. Is couleur the word for Foxian in Borisin language? That's what immediately comes to my mind, because I can't think of what else that is. Because it says we, and as far as I can tell, this is Feixiao's voice. I'm not as familiar with her Japanese voice, but I think it's her. So it would be strange for her to be referring to herself as something other than a Foxian, unless the word she is using is another word for Foxian, presumably that of Borisin, given that she is talking about a time when Foxians were little more than food to the Borisins. So it would make sense aesthetically and narratively to refer to that past time under their past name that the Borisins gave them. That's just what I think. And live as slaves for war. Yeah, so that's in line with what the Foxians were in the case of the Borisins ruling over them, having them as slaves, eating them, that kind of thing. And we have Feixiao stumbling, falling to the ground, looking up with a level of desperation of defeat. And it's then when I saw the light. That same rainbow shooting star across the sky. It told me, as long as you look toward the distance. And with that, we get Feixiao getting back up and continuing to run, clearly inspired by this shooting star, as a bright arrow of light shoots past her, as long as you still go faster. And we get a shot, and we get a vague shot of her mentor, who is wielding the bow we see Feixiao with at the beginning, presumably having shot that arrow. As long as you keep going forward, repeating that phrase. So long as you look toward the distance, so long as you go a little faster, as long as you keep going forward. It's speaking to this idea of, in desperate times, in hopeless times, the fundamental thing that cannot be forgotten is that you must always be moving forward no matter how hopeless things are, if you ever hope for things to get better. For things to get better, you can never give up. You must always be pushing forward, going as fast as you can. As long as you are just a little faster than you were before, or those chasing you, then you know for a fact that someday you will be able to escape and get to something better. And with these words, we have her future mentor reaching out, in this case being a literal savior of Feixiao's life, as other Foxians in the background move in to protect, as a rain of arrows comes down above them. But the general, her future mentor, just takes this moment to acknowledge this desperate fleeing child. And to what I was saying before, the words continue saying, "You'll find the arrowhead of the hunt." And that is where we get a much more defined aspect of what I was talking about. If you take the idea I was talking about of, as long as you keep going and never stop and move a little faster and don't give up, as long as you keep that hope in your heart, you will reach the point where things are better. And what the phrasing of this adds to that is the implication that that salvation at the end is the hunt. Not just the hunt itself, the arrowhead of the hunt. And symbolically, the representation of that is that shooting star and Feixiao's mentor. And we get these words as things shift to an image of Feixiao being mentored in the bow and having imagery of Borisins torn through by arrows. And then it goes to black and we get the line, "I've raised my hands. I am groveling prey no more." And it's now, having seen Feixiao still as a child being taught the ways of the bow, taught the ways to kill her oppressors and free others, we now see her standing on her own with her own bow. And she states, "I will decide their fates." And the incredibly interesting piece of this, saying their fates, is incredibly non-distinct, as it could entirely mean one of two things in my mind. Probably both, actually. It could, one, mean I will decide the fates of the Borisins, my former oppressors. I will enact justice upon them, and in that, enact vengeance against those who oppressed me and my people. As we have learned in the story, vengeance is not something outside of the scope of the hunt. Vengeance is encompassed within the hunt. Therefore, justice and vengeance can be one and the same in this scenario. But the other way of interpreting this is bringing justice and freedom and salvation to the rest of the Foxians, just as her mentor did for her. And like I said, I feel like in all likelihood, it's both at once in this case. As the symbol we have of how she can decide their fates, whoever they are, is her drawing back a bow, pulling a weapon ready to kill. And with that, she can achieve both goals by slaying the oppressors and liberating those that she is here to free. She looses the arrow, but now she's not fighting Borisins, she's fighting Marastruck, which is an interesting difference. She's still fighting abominations of the abundance, but now her scope is much wider. The Cloud Knights write with valor, and the Verdantia proclaim glory, to break the Borisin and quell the plague bearers. Something I find uniquely interesting here, which I'm not entirely sure the intent behind, is the constant cutting between Feixiao cutting through the Borisin and the plague bearers, and imagery of happy children running around with posters or newspapers or something along those lines, happily running along. And then it's just this interesting dichotomy, which I don't entirely understand what they're getting at there. It happens a few times here. But then we get this shot of Feixiao in front of an entire platoon of soldiers, looks like all Foxian. She raises her blade and they aim their guns. And we see that the children are playing happily with toys of Feixiao and of her weapons. She has become a symbol, an icon, a legend among her people. She is someone who instills a sense of peace now within the children of the Xianzhou. She has brought salvation to many. One broke the battle lines alone and claimed reign over distance of leagues beyond leagues. The Merlin's claw descends. The mountains tremble, but the Yaoxing is unshakable. So I assume, given that we immediately get reference to the Merlin's claw directly after, and we have Feixiao in the imagery here, that when it says one, it is referring to Feixiao. The idea that she is this legendary figure who has broken through the battle lines all on her own, has claimed reign over distance of leagues, beyond leagues. She has done what no other general could have done. She has led by example beyond what could be comprehended. And as it says, the mountains tremble, but the Yaoxing is unshakable. I'm terrible with the pronunciation, I apologize, but regardless. And in line with all of these previous statements, my immediate thought is the reason it is unshakable is because of its unshakable leader, as we have imagery of her standing tall, holding up the banner of her people, of the Merlin's claw. But then, interesting enough, it starts cutting between modern Feixiao and young Feixiao. The Feixiao who was still a groveling slave who could not protect themselves. And it's with this reminder that she then states, should even one abomination still remain, then the heaven and earth remain enchained. And we get this imagery of a desolate wasteland, the young Feixiao looking out across it, as in the distance it looks like the remnants of a city, and the only light in the entire image is that rainbow shooting star. And what this speaks to me is the idea that this is a path of justice, but also much more a path of vengeance. This is a hunt. This is not a simple, glorious battle against those that are wrong and evil. This is hunting down every single one of the people who are perceived to have done wrong to Feixiao and her people. Now, whether or not that is born of a legitimate conscious malice towards those who have hurt her, or if it's more of just a grandstanding black and white perspective of the world, that it is the Borisin and Plague Bearers who have done wrong, therefore they don't deserve to exist, rather than something that is more gray in the idea of not every single thing born of the abundance is necessarily fundamentally evil. Now, of course, it's entirely possible that that is the case and they are going for something more black and white, but immediately in my mind, I hear these words that as long as one plague bearer survives, the earth and skies will remain enchained. And when I hear enchained, I think the idea that they are implying that the abundance is a curse on the world that chains it down, that oppresses all who live within the world as long as it still exists. But regardless, it then continues saying, as the skybow shatters stars and severs storms. Good alliteration there. And then we once again cut to a different battlefield rather than a wasteland after the battle. We have Feixiao in the middle of a war, standing over the battlefield as she watches her people fight against the hordes of Borisin, the shooting star still overhead. And she makes the proclamation that I become their arrow. And with that in mind, that leads me to actually think that the point previously when she was referring to they, that she was more specifically referring to the Foxians and the people of the Xianzhou rather than the Borisans. So it probably in that exact context wasn't that double meaning, but it still could be. Regardless, with this context, she is absolutely talking, well, actually, this could still have that double meaning. Because becoming their arrow, there's the more obvious interpretation, which is I become the tool and weapon of my people to slay our enemies, the tool of our salvation. But if we take a slightly more interesting interpretation, she is the arrow that is meant for all of the Borisans and all of the plague bearers and all of the abominations of the abundance. She is the arrow meant to pierce them, therefore she is their arrow. And that is a bit of a sort of interpretive stretch there, but I sort of like the vibe it gives, and I wouldn't put it past them to do something like that as a secondary meaning. But regardless, I think the primary meaning is being the tool and weapon of her people to slay their enemies and bring them out of oppression. Okay, so editing Sylvan coming in right here, just to acknowledge, I realized that what is much more obviously the actual intended meaning here when they refer to they is that of the hunt itself, as whenever the Aeons are referred to, they always in the subtitles capitalize the entire word that is referring to them. So even if my other interpretations are equally accurate, it is much more likely that the explicit intent of this is to refer to the hunt, to refer to the idea that Feixiao is becoming the weapon of the hunt itself. But yeah, so just wanted to cut in with that because I realized I completely missed that. I find it very cool how when we get this super close-up shot of just her eyes, it flickers between the two versions of her we have, as we then just get some fighting animation, actually, of all things. Which I'd just like to acknowledge, I really love the art style of all of this, it's fucking great. And now this is where things get particularly interesting for me, as we have all of the Borisans coalescing into this massive red wolf, which I personally imagine is much more of a metaphorical thing than a literal they all coalesce into this one entity, but more so this thematic and metaphorical sense that this is the identifying image of all of the Borisans, this massive intimidating force that demands servitude and submission. And we have Feixiao not cowering before it, as the words, "the remnants of the abominations linger. The bloodletting is ceaseless," speaking to the horrors of the Borisan. And when I take the vanguard, ahead a grand victory looms, saying that her presence determines victory, as if it is almost predestined. And it is with this statement that we get this symbol appearing on her back, which my immediate thought is Impact Third stigmatas, but I don't know if that's really the case. I know that in Impact Third there's a lot of weird logistics lore of how safe stigmatas are and how, if not properly done, they can actually be harmful to people, which makes me curious if that has something to do with her mysterious sickness that she seems to have. But that's just getting into massive theorizing territory based on lore for other games, so I'm not going to go too deep on that. But as this symbol glows, she transforms into this wolf-like creature of her own, but is this much more bright, shining aesthetic that seems to actually have wings of their own. So being something not tied to the ground, something greater. And we then get the representation of the Borisan again, looking up at this utterly massive symbol of Feixiao's power. It, I believe, turns to run, but is unable to escape the dominating force that is Feixiao, as it is crushed underfoot. But it's here where things begin to distort, and a line comes saying, "not enough." And we have more smaller representations of the Borisan being torn through, one in its death throes as it gets destroyed by her, to face this terror head-on, now in quotations, as these monsters that were once the most terrifying thing to Feixiao now stand in horror of her, seeing her as the monster, seeing her as the thing that hunts them to oblivion. And in the end of the battle, she stands alone, picking up her banner and raising it to signal victory. The symbol on her back glows again as she speaks, saying, "only the hunt endures beyond death," saying that the creations of the abundance are unnatural. The Borisans are monstrous beings that deserve to be forgotten in their death. but the hunt is eternal. It will not end. It is not shackled by the curses of the abundance, yet holds all of the eternal power of it. It is beyond death. And it's here that we have this symbol of her with the banner raised once more, the symbol on her back shining, and the various ships of the Xianzhou coming in to support her as she stands atop a pile of bodies. And we come to what initially appears to be the end, but we have so much more to see. And it's here where we get a very interesting wrinkle. We have her in, once again, a battlefield, potentially the same battlefield, but a different part of it, as this red sunset is occurring behind her, framing her in the center of this piece, in this dark, ominous vibe. She is alone as she calls out, "Oh, rainbow," calling out to the hunt. Even if there comes a day when the terror, moon rage, devours me whole, this arrow will still pierce my heart. And before I analyze those lines too much closer, I want to tie them into the visuals that are happening alongside them. So she calls out to the rainbow as she's looking down, looking at her reflection in this puddle that then distorts into the visage of a Borisin, but one that is seemingly a mix of aesthetic of the darker red elements of the Borisin that we've seen in this, as well as the white fur of her manifestation of power that we saw earlier. So this idea that the terror, the moon rage of the Borisin is something that is at risk of devouring her as well. Which is interesting, because as far as I understood, it wasn't necessarily that there was any real infection that the Borisins were connected to, just that they had their pheromones that made people terrified of them. But the idea that this terror will devour her whole potentially, and we see even beyond the reflection, her feet, which we could faintly see for a moment before, turn into claws of a Borisin. And she looks down in horror as she covers her face, as she makes the assertion that even if this does occur, even if she is consumed and devoured by this terror, this arrow will still pierce my heart. As we get an image of her aiming her bow at herself. And even just the line, "This arrow will pierce my heart," she was describing herself as the arrow before, meaning that she's basically calling out to the hunt, to Lux, saying, "I assure you, even if I'm devoured by the very things I hunt, the very terror that I destroy, I will not leave myself as an exception. I will destroy myself when the time comes, before all else befalls." So it's speaking to this idea that she is aware of the power she holds, and she will use it to the best of her ability as long as she can, but recognizes that it will one day consume her, and that before it fully does, she promises that she will cut herself down before she can destroy anything that she cares about. And this leads me to think that perhaps the true nature of this mysterious sickness that she has, which I assume we're going to be learning more about soon, is fundamentally based out of the idea that she has tapped into something of the Borisin's power, but it corrupts her in some way. Whether or not that is literal, or more so just metaphorical in the sense she's tapped into some power that is now destroying her, even if it isn't explicitly that of the Borisins or of the Abundance, I find it hard to believe that the origin of her sickness is not that of one intentionally or otherwise placed upon herself as a sacrifice to gain power so that she can achieve her goals. I could be way off with that, but that is where my mind goes with all we see in this, and I'm very curious to see if that's true. But with that, I think I'm going to leave it there. I think I've parsed out most of the things I want to really parse out. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to like and subscribe if you did, and leave a comment on your thoughts if you agree with me, if you think I'm way off, that kind of thing. And I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.